So good morning, good afternoon, good evening for our folks over in Asia. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Christopher Dorn. I'm the CEO of Invado Solutions. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO of Invado Solutions. I've been in the marketing automation space for about 18, 19 years now. I was actually co-founder of a Pardot competitor back in 2003. And I was VP of marketing, so I'm very familiar with the challenges many of you may be facing out there in terms of leveraging marketing automation to drive demand. After an exit from that company, I actually went to Salesforce as a senior director of marketing for about 3 years. And after that, I started Invado Solutions. Before we get started, the agenda for today: housekeeping. We'll talk momentarily. Go through some introductions in terms of myself and then our head of demand gen strategy. And then we're going to talk about what a strategy looks like in terms of our demand generation model. And then we're really passionate about how do you connect the technology to the strategy. My guess is that about 99% of you currently use Pardot and Salesforce. We want to make sure you walk away with some really strong actions in terms of how you could actually turn this, what you learned today from a strategy, into action. Q&A is the most important part. I learned the most from the Q&A. And then we're going to walk away with some really solid next steps where Carlos and myself are going to actually open up our calendars and offer the opportunity to just give some 1-hour meetings to folks that joined today in terms of some coaching and a baseline assessment, in terms of giving our perspective in terms of where you might be at in terms of the technology and the strategy, and really some next steps in terms of how you can really begin to leverage the Pardot and Salesforce. Housekeeping. Everyone's muted right now. If you have any problems, please send it to chat and we'll respond as quickly as possible. Ask your questions via the questions tab. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes, 35 at best, and then we're really excited to spend the remainder of the time with questions, Q&A. And we're going to answer them live. And then afterwards, everyone's favorite question that's already been posted about 4 times is, yes, everyone who registered will have a recording. We're also going to be posting it on the Resource Center on invadosolutions.com, so you'll be able to share that as well. So let's get to it. I already introduced myself here, Christopher Dorn, my background, marketing automation, Salesforce. Really excited today to be joined by Carlos Hidalgo. Recently, Invado I'm super excited to have brought Carlos on board as our head of demand gen strategy. We've been passionate about really working with our customers on how do you leverage this technology. Carlos is now working with all of our clients to really take them to the next level. He's been in the B2B marketing automation space for about 25 years now. He is author of an extremely well-received book called Driving Demand, which is a top-rated book. And he's also the former CEO of another demand gen agency. So we're super excited to have him aboard to share his 25 years of insights. Really quickly about Invado Solutions, we have lots of our clients on here. We also have lots of new folks. Our mission is really partnering with marketers on their journey with Salesforce. What I found out in the ecosystem is there's lots of SIs out there, and then you got lots of marketing agencies. Invado takes the best of both worlds to really drive the technology, but then also develop marketing strategies and demand gen strategies to actually leverage Salesforce to drive that success. So we consider ourselves experts in Salesforce, a la Pardot, Sales Cloud, but then also how to leverage that technology. And we're really excited to share that insight today. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Carlos Hidalgo, the head of demand gen strategy for Invado Solutions. Carlos?
Thanks, Christopher. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to attend the webinar. We've got over 90 people dialed in, and I know as a marketer, your time is so valuable. So let's dive right in when we talk about demand generation. And one of the things when we go to the next slide here that you'll see when we talk about demand generation is CMO Council did a study and they asked, what are your top goals when it comes to marketing automation? And one of the things that we heard and we've seen literally over the last 15 years, which when you write a book on these types of things, is no surprise increasing lead generation is number one. But if you look at all of these responses, these 6 responses here, what you will find is that so many of these, the majority of these, the overwhelming majority, are all a part of demand generation. So when we talk about demand generation, I'm going to show you a definition here in a moment. But what we really talk about is this end-to-end program, which maps to the buyer's journey, which isn't a funnel. It's not a waterfall. I've never heard a B2B buyer say, I'm on the sales accepted lead stage of my buying process. So we really have to understand that we don't just want to generate a lead at the top of the funnel. We really want to nurture and engage them for the purposes of sales revenue. And that is our goal with demand generation. And while we are, as Christopher mentioned, we are a Pardot partner, we are a Salesforce partner, we know, and our technology partners will attest, that we are not going to achieve that with technology alone. And so when we look at these top goals, think about increasing lead gen, lead nurturing, improving customer engagement, generating sales revenue, and improving campaign measurability are all part of demand generation. So as we go to this next slide, I think what we need to do is take a look and say, how are we doing with these goals? How successful are we with achieving the goals that we have laid out? And what was really interesting in this study by Ascend 2 is that only 61% say, well, we're kind of somewhat successful. Now, I don't know about you. I don't wake up every morning and say, I really just want to go in and kind of be mediocre and be somewhat successful in my job. I want to be the 17%. I want to be best in class. I want to be very successful. So if you look at how we're doing collectively as a group with marketing automation and in part with our Pardot marketing automation platform, 77% here are saying, not at all, or it's just okay. And in my experience, in my 25 years in working with organizations, big and small, what I have found is the biggest roadblock to that success is the definition of a strategy. So what I want to do now, before we dive into this strategy and understanding it from a buyer's perspective, I want to define demand generation. So we at Invado, when we talk about demand generation, we are talking about a strategy that is developed by both marketing and sales. Now, this may be a shift for you. This is may cause some of you to roll your eyes and say, please, sales, are you kidding me? It is imperative that we align, collaborate, unite, integrate with our sales organization. Because anytime we say, hey, we just flipped it over the fence or we're handing it off, if sales isn't involved, they're not going to respond the way we need them to. You'll also see here some of the highlighted things. This is all about our buyers. This aligns to our buyers' stages, not our waterfall, not our funnel, the buying stages, using the channels and the content that they prefer. And then you see down below, the enablement is done by the technology, Pardot and Salesforce. So this is what we are going to be using as our definition during this webinar and anytime you read your blog. So let's take a look at the buyer's journey. Demand Gen Report, if you don't follow them, I would highly recommend that you do, did us a great service in kind of giving us a macro view of a buyer's journey. So what's really interesting is years ago, CEB, which is now Gartner, came out and said, hey, buyers are 57% of the way through their journey before they ever engage with a salesperson. It rocked marketing and sales. It was a huge sea change. Different research came out trying to disprove that. Here's the ultimate thing, is in any B2B, typical B2B purchase, there's up to 7 different decision makers that are part of that buying committee. Now, it doesn't mean they all play the equal role all the way through that journey. But what they do is they add complexity to that. And so when we look at this linear 1 through 9, I wish it was that easy. I wish it was that linear all the way through the buying process. But when you add up to 7 people, we have to understand their buying motivations, their triggers, what they're trying to achieve, who's the budget holder, influencers, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I want to point out is it's not until step 8, according to the research from Demand Gen Report, where it says they accepted outreach from vendors. So if you're using Pardot right now to just blast emails as a spam cannon, I'm going to encourage you to stop that practice, because you're probably getting very little response from it. You're running the risk of being or blacklisted, and you're trying to interrupt the buyer's motion, their buying process. Better to do the work around the personas and understand the journey and develop the content and try to integrate your inbound and outbound channels. So when we think about this buying journey, it's not hey, we put a white paper out on the website, collected these names, send them off to sales. That's not how that works. I'm going to apologize for background noise. Having a little bit of construction done. Didn't know it was scheduled for today due to some mix-ups, but my apologies for that. If you can hear that, I know I can, but let's move on. So what do we do with this complex buying cycle? One of the things we did here in response to what our customers asked of us is they said, hey, do you have a model? Do you have an approach that we can take to ensure that we are doing demand generation that aligns to our buyers and puts our buyers at the center? And so we did. We came up with 3 different perspectives that you need to think about from a demand generation perspective. Now, I want to be clear. There's a lot of detail behind this. And Christopher mentioned, happy to spend an hour with you to walk through this in more detail. But let's first take the outside-in approach, which most organizations don't do. If we're going to talk about buyer-centric demand generation, we have to put ourselves in the buyer's shoes. If you've ever been a buyer at the corporate level or in the business level, you know it's not an easy task. So what do you start with? You start with discovery. You're going out now and you're trying to qualify and quantify your needs. You're doing internal fact gathering. You're establishing key stakeholders that are going to be part of this purchase committee, and you're identifying vendors. One of the first things you do, like we do in our consumer lives, you're probably going to Google and typing in the problem you're trying to solve, or typing in your need, or typing in, is there a solution or a service that addresses A, B, and C? If you're doing a branded search, most likely you're going to Amazon, which is the #1 property for branded searches. Once you do that, then you're starting to engage with those vendors at some potential form and fashion. You're exploring the potential solutions. You're downloading content. You're talking to peers. Depending on the size of your organization, you may be talking to some of the analysts. You're consulting some of the industry blogs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what's really interesting here is look at that second bullet, creating a short list of vendors. This is mind-blowing for salespeople, because it used to be not so long ago that a salesperson's whole goal was to try to get on the short list. Most B2B organizations, and even in the higher ed space in which we do a lot of work, are creating short lists long before they ever engage with a salesperson. So this is incumbent upon us as marketers to make sure that we're helping these buyers make the right decision through our content and through our interaction. Once they do that engagement, then they move to purchase. They've created that short list. They're starting to request a quote. They may go out to RFP. They're doing their vendor due diligence. So this is the buyer experience, very high level, 35,000 foot view. So now we're going to look at what is our job as a marketer. How do we take that buyer experience and respond in kind to map to what they're doing? The buyer's out there doing discovery. We need to match that with attracting them with our inbound and outbound channels. How do we do that? First and foremost, we have to develop the buyer personas. This is not a set it and forget it exercise. This is something we should be optimizing at a minimum of 3 times a year. We also have to understand the journey. I believe in buying milestones. When there's up to 7 individuals involved, we want to understand what are the key milestones they are going through, who is involved at that milestone, and then what are some of the actions they are taking at each and every milestone. Then we can look at our content and say, do we have content that aligns to those actions and to those key roles that are part of that buying committee? Once we've done that, we start to define the channels that the buyers prefer. Don't just start investing in channels unless you know that's where your buyers are. I worked with a CMO once who told me, we've invested over $100,000 in social media. It's going to be great. We started to do some of the persona definition for them and understood their buyers didn't use social media. 6 figures wasted because they didn't do the work up front to understand the channels that their buyers prefer. Well, once our buyers start to engage, we need to nurture that relationship. It's all about creating a digital dialogue and having continuity of conversation. So as they're starting to engage with us, we're nurturing that relationship. We're tying some of that top of mind buying triggers, some of that qualification and quantification of the needs to the solutions or services that we can offer them. And it is an ongoing dialogue. I want to be clear. Drip emails is not nurturing. It's time-based emails. Nurturing is trigger-based. If I'm a buyer and I take an action, I'm responding. And this is where Pardot and Salesforce really help enable that dialogue. And then we want to convert. We want to work with sales and enable them to have that continuity from a digital conversation to a person-to-person conversation. And when we do that, we will have the opportunity to win more deals. So the third perspective in this model is how we operationalize our demand generation. We have to look at that operational view. And so you see attract, nurture, convert. Well, then we have to have some basic MarTech. And foundationally, it's Pardot and Salesforce. It's why you're here today, is to learn how to do this with your Pardot and Salesforce instances. We have to look at analytics and optimization. It's one thing to pull analytics. We should be using analytics to optimize our programs and our campaigns going forward. And then our data, foundational to everything we're doing. And I contest that it's probably one of the most valuable resources a marketing organization has, but at the same time, it's often one of the most neglected resources from a marketing perspective. And then the marketing operations function, vitally important that you have people, whether it's an outsourced operation, a hybrid, or in staff, that are manning these systems, managing the reporting, and bringing some of that consultative power so you can continually optimize. So that is the model that we have, that we are bringing to our clients. And as Christopher mentioned, I hope I get some time with you going forward to walk through this and also look at your overall demand gen maturity, because once you invest in that, that is when you will really start to see the value from your Pardot and Salesforce investment. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Christopher, and I'll see you back at the Q&A.
Thanks, Carlos. As we mentioned, please keep these questions coming. We're getting some great questions in here after I close out on this section in terms of connecting the strategy with your tech infrastructure. We'll spend 15, 20 minutes going through the Q&A, so please keep them coming. So now that you understand the strategy in terms of attract, nurture, convert, the question is, how do we bring this together? And we really like to think you need to think about this holistically. So as Carlos discussed, we have the strategy on the left, which is personas, channels, content, analytics, messaging, campaigns. But then there's the technology stack, right? And to be quite honest, most people come to us with technology problems. They say, hey, can you implement lead scoring and grading for us? And then the question is, sure, do you have personas? And I'm like, oh. So we always want to make sure we're talking about that. And then on the technology side, it's Salesforce, Pardot, account-based marketing tools, data, Google channels, and then middleware and integrations. So let's talk a little bit about how you begin to bring those together and how we take the strategy and connect that to the technology. So going back to what Carlos said, on the left-hand column here, we talked about personas. And this is one of the biggest problems we see folks coming to us with, is that they haven't really done the research, or if they've done the research, it's really their point of view. Sales has not contributed. Have they done customer interviews? So when you've done that research and get that on paper, get your organization aligned to it, commonly used tech features that we're going to want to allude to, and that we want you to really think about, is really standard Salesforce custom object fields, leads, contact, objects, and trying to get every person into a persona as best you can. Pardot progressive profiling, in terms of getting that data and Pardot profiles, as you're gathering that data, titles, buying authority, things like that, this will all roll up to the personas as you learn about them, right? Using the progressive profiling and Pardot profiles, we can then begin to make sure that everyone is bucketed into the personas. And then the final piece of that is data enrichment tools and data cleanliness. I'm going to mention a couple tools that we like to allude to. Data is the heart of success with marketing automation. It's a journey. We have some folks that come to us like, I don't want to talk strategy until I have my data perfect. And I'm like, well, it's never perfect. So think about this as a never-ending journey. But how do you begin that journey? Reporting is absolutely critical here. So we love to build out dashboards around data quality, data cleanliness, and then completeness. Look, if you have, if 20% of you only have titles and authority for 20% of your data, it's really difficult to get personas in there. But if we get that up to 60, 70, 80%, you're really going to become best in class. And so how do we get that completeness in there too? And that's kind of a key report we love to look at. And so final comments on this, data normalization, some samples of tools that we like to use, Inside View, Clearbit, Ringlead, and then some custom shops, finding some folks, we can make some recommendations if you DM me offline that can really get for our ABM clients, account-based marketing clients, that can get everything that you really need to know about someone. You're going to pay for it, but if you're targeting 500 to 1,000 accounts, I can guarantee those key data points are going to be worth it at the end. And then, data cleanliness, our go-to tool around that is Cloudingo. There's some really good data functionality that we always recommend you start with in Salesforce. It needs configuration and setup and management. Next step would be a Cloudingo and really getting that in place. Buyer's journey. So as Carlos talked about, this is really a process to really think about, and it's going to be different by persona, and for every organization, it's very different. So doing that research that we love doing and identifying how your buyers are moving through it is absolutely critical. Again, we want to know for any account, contact, and lead, where are they at in that process? So what we do is once we've documented and created a strategy, are going to make sure that we can identify where people are at. The most embarrassing thing that we could do, and the biggest no-no, is be sending out the same message and the same content to your clients, your customers, and your prospects, saying the same thing. Join us for why you should buy from us webinar. It's just you're degrading your brand, but we see it happening time and time again. So identifying where folks are at and using just some basic functionality is really important, but it's hard to get. And there needs to be a lot of configuration that goes into that to make sure that people are tracking that. And that goes into status fields. I mean, at the end of the day, but a lot of automation on the back end to understand where they're at. I mean, we need to make this an automated process, because the more manual it becomes, and we all know that sales wants to, look, they have quotas. They're not as likely to enter that data manually. Pardot grading and scoring, folks, we get leads in this every day, and it's one of our most read blog topics. How do we do this? Set this up for us. Okay, have you done the homework? Do you have the personas? Do you have the buyer's journey? The buyer's journey is about a formal handoff between marketing and sales. Grading and scoring is that handoff. As you're going to see, I'll talk about in a minute with the reporting, that this is where marketing can really, where the rubber meets the road. So if you haven't done the homework, we're really, sure, we could turn it on for you, we could set it up, but are you really going to get the business value? I'm going to argue no. So let's talk about what goes into that. Get the stakeholders at the table and do your homework. And the final pieces of the buyer's journey is really, reporting. The campaign object, B2B MA are really important to this, guys. And again, garbage in, garbage out. If you have good data, we could really put together some great reports around how are people moving through the buying process and the buyer's journey. So, key reports we love to look at. Really depends on where you're at in your journey. Our conversion rates from stage to stage. If we can define that buyer's journey, how quickly are you moving people from that stage to stage, right? What is what I would call your momentum? Look, if you have a 6-month buying cycle, we can knock that down to 4. Huge impact, right? In terms of your yearly goals, and marketing is playing a pivotal role in that. And that we would measure in terms of momentum and buying stages, right? How long are people sitting at each stage? And that's going to be in, again, simple fields with data, data stamping. So, a key example would be, okay, well, are you, time date stamping when different fields convert? Conversion based on firmographic and personas. Are certain groups within your data set moving faster than others. And then finally, campaigns. At the heart of this, we are giving a trigger-based nurtures, not buyer nurturing based on time-based, as Carlos alluded to. You really want behavior-based, right? So what we're going to do is really look at, okay, if they download this, let's move them to the next stage, right? Well, campaigns are the heart of this. So looking at the campaigns, and look, there's some really strong reports. So for example, campaign influence reporting in Salesforce, really powerful. Very few people know that it's there. But again, it's also going to be, how are you using the campaign object? How are you using fields? Is there good data in there? And this goes into your overall strategy that I'll talk about in a minute with Salesforce. So I already talked about the comments here. Moving along, and by the way, we're getting some great questions. Please keep them coming. So sales and marketing handoff. This is really where the rubber meets the road. Again, I've already alluded to a lot of this, but grading and scoring officiates that handoff. Object fields, progressive profiling is going to be collecting this data. The one I really want to talk about here, data enrichment tools are really important here, because we can't grade on what we don't know about people, right? So how are you getting that data? You can ask them. You could use third-party tools. We're big fans internally. We use Inside View for enriching folks, and understanding their titles. But an example of how this becomes really valuable is it gets really hard if you want to sell to VPs of IT, because if you're just asking them in a text field, VP, there's 20 different ways to Sunday to actually put VP in there. So what we like to do is write some automations and some tools on the back end to actually say, okay, perhaps we need to ask where their authority. So maybe there's 4 buckets. Are you an individual contributor? Are you a manager? Are you a director? Are you an executive? That gives you a much better feel, and people can self-select where that's at. Or we can also try to get people in that in the background. So there's just some way of getting that data in enrichment. To also get that the reporting that we're going to talk about is UTM parameters are just absolutely essential here. To get the reports you need to measure all the channels, which is another thing that Carlos talked about, making sure you're giving the right content to the right channels and measuring the impact here. And this is hard. I mean, kind of come from Salesforce. Salesforce is not built really for marketers. And so it's our job to really mold the solution to it. So we need to use some tricks, and UTM parameters are a great tool to have in your tool belt in terms of Google display advertising, what's working, what's not, and what is generating the most business for you. We really need to understand that. And then rolling all that into the campaign object in different fields. And this is where Google Analytics, B2B MA is absolutely critical, and just standard reporting actually becomes really important as well. Another key function that Pardot is doing around here that is relatively new is account scores over time. How are they changing? We really want to measure that, because again, the handoff between sales and marketing becomes absolutely critical here. So when we can track those account scores, and if you're more of an account-based marketing model, this becomes really important. And understanding, like, okay, how is this account progressing? Again, key to success here, personas. Do sales agree with those personas? Have you interviewed customers and prospective customers? The SLAs, the service level agreement with sales, they need to be at the table here. I mean, I can name I have conversations every day, like, well, we as marketing came up with personas. Well, you know what? Sales has a lot to offer here. They're having conversations every day as well. So make sure that they are aligned, and the more alignment you have, the better off you'll be in terms of working through this. Content delivery, just closing out, owning the Pardot profile and the persona fields, and understanding content is the fuel to the Pardot fire. So you have to go and make sure that you have a fully baked content roadmap. It's going to be absolutely critical. What we want to do is when organization or persona X takes a certain call to action, we automatically send them a piece of content that moves them through that journey that speaks to their pain point. forget about time-based. You're not really serving them well. You want to make sure that you're talking to their pain and their persona. Dynamic content is huge here. You know, and it saves you a ton of time. So if I know what people's persona are, where they're at in the journey, I can automatically send them that piece. And I don't need to remake, you know, emails over and over again, and I can actually just automatically insert the content. And automation rules are going to be a big deal here. You know, very trigger based. You know, we also get a lot of inbound requests like, hey, can you set us with this engagement studio? That is one really strong tool in the toolbox. Think of Pardot holistically as a set of tools. Quite often to get what you need to do, you need to think beyond Engagement Studio, automation rules, triggers, things like that, and even Salesforce rules, right? Flow, how do we put all these different pieces in place? In terms of organizational and operationally, Pardot users need to be thinking about Salesforce and Pardot. I can't stress this enough, and that the two systems are really need to be thought of holistically. If you are only a Pardot admin, you really need to think of your expertise in Salesforce as well, building on that skill set. And the final thing is lead acquisition. If you recall, that slide number 1 was really about like, this is the top priority for everyone. And people are spending so much money acquiring, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when we ask the basic question, well, is it paying off? What's your ROI? There's always this pause. Not always, but I say 90% of the time. How are you measuring this? And it really needs to get all that data through Pardot into Salesforce. And there needs to be a playbook on this, because quite often if you have Bob doing it one way and Cindy doing it another way, in terms of how you're using Pardot landing pages or forms, and it's not connected and they're using it differently, the data is garbage, and garbage in, garbage out. So writing a playbook and understanding how every lead, whether it's from a trade show or an event or a webinar, and every channel that you could possibly is coming into the platform, and how you're measuring it, whether it's UTM parameters, forms, campaigns, lead sources, that is absolutely critical. And finally, you know, thinking about other tools, demand-based, Terminus, we love working with them to enrich as you get to that adoption. It becomes really important as well. Other things to think about, Salesforce Ad Studio, big fans of that, building out lookalike audiences to serve up ads to your target audiences. Reports, we've already spoken to, you know, depending on where you're at in your adoption and your success here, there's a lot you can do with native functionality or more sophisticated B2B MA. But that playbook is just so important. I can't stress that enough, because if you're, you know, hitting literally, you know, 10 million and above, the consistency needs to be there. So really thinking about that and developing a strategy, whether it's working with us, another firm, or just internally, if you have that expertise, document it and make sure everyone is held accountable to it. And thinking about, do you overwrite fields? You know, so I hope this helps. And then I'm gonna pull Carlos in here momentarily. So next steps, and we're gonna dig in on the questions. If you have questions about technology, we just chatted, you guys. We may regret this, but Carlos and mine's calendar, and we're more than happy. We've been doing this for decades. It's in the chat right now. You know, we're happy to share, and if nothing else, just answer your questions. I focus more on the technology. Carlos focuses more on the strategy. So what we have is, you know, if you meet with us, we have a couple other slides in terms of our adoption, you know, what we've seen over, you know, 20 years in terms of the adoption, and talk to you about where you're at and like, what are the logical next steps? I see questions coming in here about, well, how do we know what our next steps are? During this call, we're happy to share like, okay, here's where you're at. Here's what we would recommend in terms of where do you go. This is a never ending journey, guys. This is not set it and forget it. You always need to improve. So you have both our calendars. Feel free to book a time. You know, I'm passionate about what we do. I can tell you Carlos is passionate. We love it. We've been in the ecosystem forever. So, you know, we're happy to just share ideas. The Invado Resource Center is awesome. I'm really proud of my team. We're sharing this. Carlos has a blog series going on about strategy. We answer technical questions. Go there, visit it. Our blog is one of the most widely read out there. And then, look, we're obviously happy to help. Please email me direct, cdorn@Invado Solutions. happy to see if we can help along your journey. If we're not a good fit, I can make other recommendations, other technologies that we recommend. Certainly willing to do that as well. Final piece is, I think we just have so many questions coming in. I think, Carlos, we should just start a blog series to answer these questions. And once a week, we're gonna just start answering these questions because it's super hard.
Yeah, I love it.
20 minutes left. We're gonna be answering these, so you'll look for some more information about these blog questions. I think we'll probably have enough to get us to the end of the year, which is fantastic. We really appreciate that. So before we dig in, again, really appreciate y'all joining today. I hope this was helpful. So let's drill into the Q&A, which is always my favorite part, Carlos. So let me just open this up here. Carlos, do you have anything to add before we move in?
No, I'm excited about the Q&A. I love doing that. Really hope I get to spend some time with all of you in our sessions. And I guess the one thing to add is, the 1 hour sessions are not a sales pitch. I want to be very clear. We're not trying to do a bait and switch here. You're not going to get, so what does it have to do to get you into a car today? We really, really want to help you. And as Christopher said, whether you use us or someone else, of course, we hope you use us. We think we're the best, but those 1 hour sessions are not designed to be sales pitches. They're designed to help you.
All right. So this is really interesting. Are personas the same as sales targets? Carlos.
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I think personas should be, sales targets should be included in the development of your personas. So what I mean by that is sales targets may say, hey, we're going to go after this account. We're going to go after CEOs. Probably what's missing from a sales target is what kind of content do they prefer? What are their watering holes or the channels that they use to get that type of content? What is their role in that purchase process and in that committee? So sales is probably not going to get to that level of specificity. And so you should take the information they have as part of their sales targets and bring that into your persona development.
Great. Next one.
This is Elizabeth Smith with W&G Approval Department.
Is there an equivalent of advertising studio for Pardot? A Salesforce add-on already
regarding our Advantage program. But I do see your pre-approval is up to $47,000. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep this in pending status for you. If you have about 5 minutes for me today, give me a call back and I can go over the details with you as well as the benefits. Just in case, my phone number is 866.
Mindy, are you hearing that there?
8532.
So yeah, in terms of the one for Ad Studio, it really depends if you're starting to get into more of an ABM approach. There are some tools, if we can list out, I really like Ad Studio, and for those that aren't aware of it, it has a really nice integration with Pardot in terms of identifying your lookalikes, right? So it'll actually look at deals you've done, identifying those folks, and then serving up ads to targets in Google and things like that. The other kind of partner organizations that we've seen out there, that are kind of next level of robustness tend to be around Terminus and demand base, and these are really powerful for generating really targeted accounts where they'll actually work with you, and Invado works with you as well to identify, we want to go after these 1,000 accounts. And the key individuals, the buyers, and working on your channels, again, they're going to ask, well, what are your channels? And who are your personas? And you need to have answers to that, right? We see organizations spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per month and not having that data. So really think about, do you have that data to give to those software providers to actually get them what they need as well. Next question. These are great. Carlos, how can I get my sales team on board with our demand generation strategy?
That is a great question. I think number one, you have to speak their language. You have to talk about revenue. You have to talk about quota. I still hear marketers kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, sales is so coin operated. Marketing should be coin operated. We're here to create revenue for our organizations. So that's number one. Number two, align as best you can around your metrics. What are you measuring? And are you measuring pipeline and contribution? You should be actually compensating your demand gen team on the pipeline and revenue created by marketing, making that part of their bonus. Once you start to do that, then you're stepping up and telling sales you're serious, and then ask for their involvement. Part of the reason sales is saying, hey, you know what, we're kind of going to give you the Heisman and keep an arm's length away from you is so many marketing teams just say, hey, we're going to create this campaign and then we're going to tell sales about it. So we enabled them. The reality is you haven't enabled them at all. You've just flipped something over the fence. So involve them in that process, involve them in the development of those personas so you can get them to the table. And then lastly, start with a pilot within your organization. If you have a specific product line, a specific tool, a specific audience, say, hey, you know what, we're going to work within this region with 1 or 2 sales reps. We're going to prove that model, and then we'll roll that out across the organization, and therefore will be minimally disruptive.
Great. I love this one. What is the best way to show marketing influenced opportunities with annualized revenue? And this seems to imply going forward, right, to 2022, 2023. Salesforce has some great campaign influence reporting that is actually out of box that you can set up. It takes 10 to 20 hours to set it up. But the caveat I'm always going to put in there is what we find is, well, the campaign object and campaigns and leads and things like that aren't being measured correctly, right? So we could, you can turn on the reports. This goes back to that playbook I discussed, and that marketing needs to have a system so that every opportunity that is created is being touched and tracked based on their level of how they're interacting with those campaigns. So if you have a $2 million opportunity, in theory, every campaign, whether it's a webinar, an email campaign, needs to be associated with that, with those contacts that are part of that opportunity, right? So then we put an ROI, an investment amount, and then those campaigns will have influenced that opportunity. That's number one. Number two, there's the role of Salesforce data. So there is a very some funkiness in Salesforce around contact roles. Every opportunity needs to be created off of a contact role in order to make sure that the opportunity amount is associated with that. There are some tools we put in place to make sure that happens. And again, we're happy to schedule some time to talk about, okay, well, here's how your data is. But that playbook is absolutely critical. There's out-of-box reports. Look, if you need to get that next level of sophistication, B2BMA is something quite often we're working at, right? But this is where that playbook and connecting sales and marketing is just absolutely critical. Very doable, but when we come in organizations, quite often it's just not there, and you have this chaos that it won't give you good data. All right. We're running out of time, but maybe we just get a couple more here. Carlos, this is for you. What is the role of content in demand generation?
Oh, content is the fuel that makes, I'm not ready to say content is king, and I know that's like the pet phrase, the customer's king. So let's be very clear about that. Content is the fuel, though, for your demand generation program. So what I have found in my 25 years of doing this is most organizations have an inordinate amount of product-based, what I call Me Too-based content. My company, my solution, my service. If we can, early stage of the buying process, be the vendor that helps the buyer qualify and or quantify, where possible, their needs, we are going to win a heck of a lot more deals than we lose. And so when you go to create content, think about, especially in the early stage of that buying process, creating content with the mindset of whether or not they buy from us, we want to make sure they make the most informed decision possible. When you do that, you are helping your buyer, you're removing friction from the buying process, and you will be seen as a vendor that is helpful. And at that point, price and product and all those things. This gets into the experience, which in 2020, yes, last year was the year experience overtook price and product as the deciding factors for a selection. So content is pivotal for that. And one of the things you should be doing is an audit on your content to see, does it align to the journey and to the various personas?
Thanks, Carlos. Okay, last question. And then we'll depart there. Again, we're going to have a blog series about this. There's so many questions that are great. Carlos and I are passionate about this. Again, you have access to our calendars here. We're happy to just share some of our knowledge, talk to you all about where you're at in this journey. And with that in mind, the last question is, we want to get more sophisticated with demand generation. Carlos, where should we start?
Yeah, it's all starting with buyer insights. It's creating those personas, understanding that journey, the milestones in the journey. Again, milestone, who's involved, what are the steps they're taking internally. So once you start there, you don't even start with content, because you don't know what content you need to create until you understand and get the insights from your buyers, understanding their personas, their motivations, their needs, their challenges, how the committee works together, and then how they're moving through that process. And then you can say, great, let's go do the content. So start with those buyer insights. And if you want to talk more about that, I'm happy to do that on our 1-hour call.
And again, if we have the opportunity, again, when we connect, or Carlos, we actually have some other slides we didn't share today, where we'll actually talk to you about what we've learned over the decades in terms of a typical trajectory, and just understanding where you're at, and like, here's where you go to that, how you go to that next stage. I mean, think about this in the matter of years, not weeks or months, right? Implementation is a never-ending journey with the technology. How can you improve? And we really value understanding where you're at, and then what is that next logical step. So on that note, again, thank you, everybody. Again, next steps you have, if you want to chat, we love sharing insights. You book a time, technology with me, Carlos, about strategy. Check out our blog. We're going to start writing a series about this. These questions are fantastic. Not enough time, as always, but look for some emails. The recording will be coming to you shortly. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.